A lot of people consider Atlanta as Black Hollywood, but did you know there was another Black Hollywood helmed by the Tyler Perry of his time? I'll tell you about it coming up. This is KRT, Critical Race Theory. It's not the one they teach in law school, but the one banned in public schools. In this episode, we reveal Oscar Micheaux, Black Hollywood before Black Hollywood. Oscar Devereaux Micheaux was an author, film director, and independent producer of more than 44 films. Although the short-lived Lincoln Motion Picture Company was the first movie company owned and controlled by black filmmakers, Micheaux is regarded as the first major African-American feature filmmaker. As a prominent producer of race films, he has been described as the most successful African-American filmmaker of the first half of the 20th century. He produced both silent films and sound films. Micheaux was born on a farm in Metropolis, Illinois on January 2, 1884. He was the fifth child born to Calvin S. and Belle Micheaux, who had a total of 13 children. His father was born a slave in Kentucky. Because of his surname, his father's family appeared to have been enslaved by French-descended settlers. French Huguenot refugees had settled in Virginia in 1700. Their descendants took slaves west when they migrated into Kentucky after the American Revolutionary War. In his later years, Micheaux wrote about the social oppression he experienced as a young boy. His parents moved to the city so that the children could receive a better education. Micheaux attended a well-established school for several years before the family eventually ran into money troubles and were forced to return to the farm. The discontented Micheaux became rebellious, and his struggles caused problems within the family. His father was not happy with him and sent him away to do marketing in the city. Micheaux found pleasure in this job because he was able to speak to many new people and learned social skills that he would later reflect in his films. When Micheaux was 17 years old, he moved to Chicago to live with his older brother, who was a waiter. Micheaux became dissatisfied with what he viewed as his brother's way of living the good life. He rented his own place and found work in the stockyards, which he found difficult. He then moved from the stockyards to the steel mills, holding down many different jobs. After being swindled out of $2 by an employment agency, Micheaux decided to become his own boss. His first business was a shoe shine stand, which he set up at a wealthy African-American barbershop away from Chicago competition. He learned the basic strategies of business and started to save money. He became a Pullman porter on the major railroads. At that time, it was considered prestigious employment for African Americans because it was relatively stable, well-paid, and secure. And it enabled travel and interaction with new people. This job was an informal education for Micheaux. He profited financially and also gained contacts and knowledge about the world through traveling, as well as a greater understanding for business. When he left the position, he had seen much of the United States, had a couple of $1,000s saved in his bank account, and had made a number of contacts with wealthy white people who helped his future endeavors. Micheaux moved to Gregory County, South Dakota, where he bought land and worked as a homesteader. This experience inspired his first novels and films. His neighbors on the frontier were predominantly blue-collar whites. Some recall Micheaux rarely sat at a table with his blue-collar white neighbors. Micheaux's years as a homesteader allowed him to learn more about human relations and farming. While farming, Micheaux wrote articles and submitted them to the press. The Chicago Defender published one of his earliest articles. His homestead failed, and he was forced to sell it in 1911. The next year, he began his publishing career when Woodruff Press of Lincoln, Nebraska, published The Conquest. He began work on a second book, The Forged Note, and from 1914 to 1918 traveled among Lincoln, Gregory County, and Sioux City, Iowa, marketing his work. While in Sioux City, he lived in and was influenced by the West 7th Street neighborhood, where the town's African-American community had a strong presence. In South Dakota, Michaux married Orlean McCracken. Her family proved to be complex and burdensome for Michaux. While he was on a business trip, she gave birth and was reported to have emptied their bank accounts and fled. Orlean's father sold Michaux's property and took the money from the sale. After his return, Michaux tried unsuccessfully to get Orlean and his property back. After that failed, Michaux decided to concentrate on writing and eventually a new industry, filmmaking. He wrote 7 novels. In 1913, 1,000 copies of his first book, The Conquest, the story of a Negro pioneer, were printed. He published the book anonymously for unknown reasons. He based it on his experience as a homesteader and the failure of his first marriage, and it was largely autobiographical. Although character names have been changed, the protagonist is named Oscar Devereaux. His theme was about African Americans realizing their potential and succeeding in areas where they had not felt they could. The book outlines the difference between city lifestyles of Negroes and the life he decided to lead as a lone Negro out on the far west as a pioneer. One of Michaux's fundamental beliefs was that hard work and enterprise would make any person rise to respect and prominence, no matter his or her race. In 1918, his novel, The Homesteader, dedicated to Booker T. Washington, attracted the attention of George Johnson, the manager of the Lincoln Motion Picture Company in Los Angeles. After Johnson offered to make The Homesteader into a feature film, negotiations broke down. Michaux wanted to be directly involved in the adaptation of his book as a movie, but Johnson resisted and never produced the film. Instead, Michaux founded the Micheaux Film and Book Company of Sioux City. Its first project was the production of The Homesteader as a feature film. Michaux had a major career as a film producer and director. He produced over 40 films, which drew audiences throughout the U.S. as well as internationally. Michaux contacted wealthy academic connections from his earlier career as a porter and sold stock for his company at $75 to $100 a share. Michaux hired actors and actresses and decided to have the premiere in Chicago. The film and Michaux received high praise from film critics. One article credited Michaux with a historic breakthrough, a credible, dignified achievement. Some members of the Chicago clergy criticized the film as libelous. The Homesteader became known as Michaux's breakout film. It helped him become widely known as a writer and filmmaker. In addition to writing and directing his own films, Michaux also adopted the works of different writers for his silent pictures. Many of his films were open, blunt, and thought-provoking regarding certain racial issues of that time. He once commented, "It's only by presenting those portions of the race portrayed in my pictures in the light and background of their true state that we can raise our people to greater heights." Financial hardships during the Great Depression eventually made it impossible for Michaux to keep producing films, and he returned to writing. Michaux's films were made during a time of great change in the African American community. His films featured contemporary black life. He dealt with racial relationships between blacks and whites and the challenges for blacks when trying to achieve success in the larger society. His films were used to oppose and discuss the racial injustice that African Americans received. Topics such as lynching, job discrimination, rape, mob violence, and economic exploitation were depicted in his films. These films also reflect his ideologies and autobiographical experiences. Michaux sought to create films that would counter negative portrayals of African Americans in films by white producers, which trafficked in degrading stereotypes. He created complex characters of different classes. His films questioned the value system of both African American and Euro-American societies, which stirred controversy with the press and state censors. He won a DGA Award in 1986. It was the 1986 Golden Jubilee Special Award. And he has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It's located at 6721 Hollywood Boulevard. This has been Critical Race Theory, Episode 12, Oscar Micheaux, Black Hollywood Before Black Hollywood. Thanks for checking in. Please like and subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. We'll see you next time.